to a new monthly session. This is monthly session of November. Today is a very special session where we have two speakers from the game industry to present to you and talk about video games. The first speaker is Aleksander Kauch, who is the senior technological lead from 11-Bit Studios, who is talking about vision in game development. And the second speaker is Willson Moreira, who is a senior CRM specialist at Miniclip, who is talking about monetization of mobile games. But first, I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of the activity plan for the month of November. Can you all see the PowerPoint? Right. As many of you might know, for this year, we changed the format of presenting gems. Instead of 4 gems per month, we now have 2 halves in a month, where we present 3 to 2 gems in each half. This was done as to not reject outright the gems that started in the beginning of each month. So this way you have more choices to choose. And because of that, the first half we had the Game of 22 gem, who and has more than 10K participants. So it's a really big gem. It started on the 1st of November and it will continue on to the rest of the month. Since it started, the theme was already announced, and the theme is cliche. So it seems like a really creative theme. If you're interested, it's kind of a little bit late to join, but I'm sure if you're really, really keen on joining, we can work something out. There's already a team on GDT participating, so you probably could join that. The second gem we presented was OST Crunch Time Gem, which is a music gem, which is different from what we normally show you. So if you're interested in music creation, this might be the gem for you. This gem where you have to create an original soundtrack to an imaginary game. And since it already started on the 4th of November, the theme was announced and it was Cyberpunk. So if you're into that, you'll probably like this one. The third gem, or the last gem for the first half we announced, was the 22nd game gem. It started today, so good luck to our team who's participating in it. I'm sure you'll do great. It seems like a really big challenge. The challenge of the gem is to create a game with only 20 seconds of gameplay, so you really have to hook in the players with your amazing gameplay and creativity. It also has a sponsor of Dragon Ruby game engine, where they're giving out licenses, commercial licenses, to all the participants to use during this gem. This gem will continue on, will last the entire month. So it's kind of a long gem where you have the time to figure out how to hook in your player. As for new gems, for the second half, we start with in 11th of November, we have Pencil Chisel Code. This is a special gem where you have to create all your visual assets. Yes, we created by you. However, you can create the assets however you want. For example, the example they gave in each IO plays was that you could actually use photography to create your assets. So they're really encouraging to be creative. So if you're interested in that, there's a post in the Discord server where you can react. And once it's time, we'll make the teams. The second gem is Dino Gem 2. As you can probably tell by the name of the gem, you have to create a game with dinosaur themed. This can be with dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures, like for example, dragons. There will also be a second optional theme that you can add to your game, but that's not required. This gem will have a judging period and a classification period. where the first place will win a secret prize. They haven't announced yet, but I'm sure they'll announce it soon. So if you're interested in that, again, there's a post in the Discord server. Finally, there's a lost cartridge gem which is a gem where you have to create a retro vintage game that gives off the feeling of a lost game cartridge that you have in a drawer somewhere. So the goal is really to create a game that gives off that nostalgia of really retro and vintage games. There's also going to be a first prize and a classification and judging period. The first prize will receive not only free retro games from the sponsors, but also a physical copy of the game that you created for the gem, which is really cool and not really seen in other gems. So yeah, as for new gems, this is already the 3 new gems that you can join. There's also the 3 ongoing gems that we have now, which is not ideal that you join, but if you're really, really keen on joining, I'm sure we can figure something out. So yeah, that's it. I'm now going to pass the word to Aleksander Kauch. Well, he's going to talk about the vision of video game development.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I will try to share my screen. Hopefully it will work. Is it okay?
It's perfect.
It's perfect. Awesome. So my name is Aleksander Kauch, and I'm Senior Technology Lead in 11-Bit Studios. And today I'd like to talk to you about vision in game development, basically how we do things in 11-Bit Studios to fulfill our ideas on games that we make. Who am I? I was a programmer of Anomaly, Anomaly 2, Funky Smugglers, and This War of Mine. In Frostpunk, I was the lead gameplay programmer and then one of the project leads. And right now, I take care of all the technology and the technology team in Frostpunk 2 as senior technology lead. So let's start with some disclaimers. First of all, I am not a designer and I'm definitely not an artist, but as a gameplay programmer, I worked closely with both design and art teams. So I got the glimpse of how they think. And second disclaimer is that when I was one of the project leads, I had direct participation in the decisions considering the final shape of the actual game. So I might know how things work, at least in 11-Bit Studios, being a programmer. Let's start with the agenda. I will go through the whole process of maintaining and conducting division in game development. I'll start with defining and getting the basic idea of what the game we want to create. And then I'll go through the means of communication, so how this vision is communicated to the rest of the world via the language of video games. And then the painful way of maintaining the vision and conducting it through the whole process of game development, which can be really difficult and sometimes painful. So, how to define the vision? First of all, you need inspiration. And from my experience, inspiration does not come by itself. It's not like some magic sparkle hits you and you have an idea. It's not Terry Pratchett's Discworld where you actually got hit by a genius idea. Maybe it sometimes happened, but it usually doesn't. So how to inspire yourself? From what I've known, various interests give a lot of ideas. If you're interested in, I don't know, poetry, fiction, movies, games, or even plants growing, then the inspiration might come from that. For example, this war of mine was inspired by just one article about the siege of Sarajevo, and because the person, Grzegorz Miechowski, our CEO, read this article, and he was like in the mindset of creating a new game, he came with an idea of civilians during the war. So it was kind of spark of genius, but it was actually, he actually sought it by broadening his interest in the world, basically. And the second thing is that ideas evolve in time. It's not that you have the initial idea and it doesn't change till the end. Sometimes it probably happen, but usually it's a process of getting this idea and like getting through what do you actually want to do with this initial vision. What is the purpose of that? It's to catch the main focus of the game. It usually should be wrapped up in a simple sentence that just defines the game. Of course, it might be more than one sentence, but the simpler it is, the better and more catchy from marketing perspective. It can be either a concept, an abstract concept of what the game is about, or some kind of unique gameplay gimmick. And to illustrate that, I would show you some examples. So a game about slaying monsters and gathering equipment in a gothic world is Diablo. Evolving a character, exploring a post-nuclear wasteland, Fallout. Extremely brutal fighting with superpowers, Mortal Kombat. And with gameplay gimmicks, time progresses only when the player moves, Superhot. Take a picture to banish a ghost, Fatal Frame or Project Zero, depending on the region, or cut your enemies into pieces, Metal Gear Rising, Revengeance. I'm fully aware that more games could fit into that idea, and it is getting harder and harder to think of something really unique, but it's still possible. It's like The Last of Us probably can be summarized by one sentence, but I'm not a writer, and to be honest, I can't figure out what would the sentence be, but you get the idea. And for our games, we had Anomaly, which was simply inverted tower defense, and you get the idea what do you do in this game. This War of Mine game about civilians during the war, and Frostpunk game about society in harsh conditions. So the initial idea serves only one purpose, to keep the design focused and on track, and to be some kind of check whether things fit into the game or not, whether they support the idea or not. Aside, of course, from marketing purposes, but that's out of the scope for this talk. When you have this initial idea, it's not the end of the process of getting it into life, into an actual idea for the game, actual vision of the game. You need to forge it. So you need to think how to present this idea to a player using the means that you are provided by the video games. So find a suitable genre. Define who are you making the game for. It's really important. Who is your target player? Are you making game for kids? Are you making game for adults? Are you making game for like hardcore players, or are you making game for casual players? Then look for the uniqueness in the project, like key selling points. What do you want to like put the most effort into? It might be gameplay, art, story, technology, and you can find examples of those things in like everywhere around the Steam. Games are based on very different foundations, and in Greece, for example, the art is the thing, and with Super Meat Boy, gameplay is the main focus, and Rage technology was the most focused thing, which kind of fired on themselves, but still. And keep in mind that this is a process, and this is not something that you can just do in one sitting, in one meeting, in a few hours. It usually takes weeks or even months. The idea for the vision for Frostpunk 2 took a few months to be really forged and to make this initial idea, a vision that we can follow right now, and it is a sequel, so it should be easier. So it probably would take more than that when starting a new, brand new game. When you have it, write it down. Write it down, and that's required to keep the development from derailing, to have something that you can relate to and that you can show people from your team that, yeah, but it's okay, but it does not fit the vision. So you have to write it down as detailed as you need, to be honest. It might be vague, but it should be like consistent. It's not that it's set in stone. Game development is a very changing industry. And it actually happened to this war of mine. It was initially a survival post-apocalyptic game. And it happened also to Frostpunk. It was initially a simple steampunk city builder. So this initial vision went through sometimes a lot of changes, but the core gameplay elements, for example, in this war of mine, the survival element, and in Frostpunk, the city building element, remained. The setting has changed in those examples. It turned out for the better, but that's not always the case. So I especially would like you to avoid pre-production hell. So forging the idea a little bit too long and not really making a game, but making the best idea of a game that you can. It can be really tedious and long process. When you have the vision, when you know what the game are you making, then you have to choose the means of communication with players and how to communicate your vision with the rest of the world. And it's not a scientific division, but I find that main channels of communication in game development, in games, are mechanics. So what does the player do? Systems, how the game reacts to players' action. UI UX, how the player interacts with the game. Art style, what does the player see or hear. And general tone and narration, so how the game speaks to the player. Getting into detail, mechanics define the genre and the game itself. If you choose to have shooting mechanic, you almost instantly make a shooter game or a game that would be perceived as a shooter game. So this is the most important communication channel because often you hear a question, what do you do in that game? So that's exactly what you need to think about in relation to mechanics. And the mechanics relate and originates from players' intentions. I want to explore. I want to manage the city. I want to shape the story. I want to kick ass and chew bubblegum. These are all valid intentions of player that seeks the game that would entertain him or her. So players' actions with mechanics, players' actions should always correspond with the theme of the game. If this game is focused on city building, do not include advanced combat because it will overshadow that or be in a contradiction with that. If the focus is on narration, don't include agility-based action. Usually people who want narrative experiences don't want to be like a skillful player. They want the story. Of course, experiment, but every time you do it consciously, and this should be a very deliberate choice and not something that just comes around during the game development because it seems fun. Mechanics should always fit the game vision and not distract player from it. So you want to get the player into the mood, immerse him into the game, and not distract him with some mechanics that don't really fit. And there is a term for that. It's called ludonarrative dissonance. So it is a conflict between a video game's narrative told through the story and the narrative told through the gameplay mechanics. Sorry. A stellar example of that, at least in my opinion, is in the first Tomb Raider reboot game, where Lara kills a deer and she cries over that, and it was a horrific experience. And a few minutes later, you enter a village and kill everyone there, and like, whatever, it's fine. So that was the narration told us something very different, and the actual mechanic told us otherwise. So here comes the ludonarrative dissonance. I do things that contradict the narration the game tries to build. Second channel, systems. Systems is something that I call under the hood game features, something that is not directly connected with the player, but it's the way the game reacts to what we do in the game. The systems intertwine with almost every single other aspects, because if it's the mechanics basically of world and the features of the world you are constructing in the video game, it of course affects mechanics, tone, user experience, or even art sometimes. And systems originate in players' expectations. So I expect enemies to hide when I shoot at them. I expect NPC to hate me when I do something awful to them. I expect the crate to break when I hit it. It's like red barrels always explode. It's something that you kind of expect in video games. Systems can be viewed as an interactive world presented to the player. So it is the world where the player, using his mechanics, have some field of decision, some ways of interacting with the world, and the response of this world is included in systems. For example, economy system. For example, in Frostpunk, AI behavior in FIFA, level design. In games like Super Meat Boy, where the level design is one of the key elements. Movement, driving, and shooting model. How does it really feel to drive a car that bumps into something? It can be very different, and it is straightly dependent on the systems underneath. Then we've got user interface and user experience. I tackled them both, and they are basically two different things, but for the purpose of this presentation, I will make it like one thing. These define the feel of the game, how the player, what is the medium between the actual human and the computer that simulates the world. And keep in mind that video games are an interactive medium. Interaction must be as clear, as smooth as possible, because that's the uniqueness of games. That's what differs games from movies or books. They are not interactive media. They sometimes try to be, but still. And the less is between player and his experience, the better. And user interface and interactions originate into intuition and some previous experiences from other games the player played. So if I see a big flashy message, probably this is something important, or an advert. If I press up arrow, I move forward. If I see a highlight, then the thing is interactive. It's something that if you ever played any kind of like more complicated game than Pong, then you probably get the idea. This is UI should never distract the player from the actual gameplay. It should be as seamless as possible. And you can, by the usage of user interface or the flow of that interface, focus player on key elements of your game. If for example, health bar is a big thing, then probably the game is about maintaining health. Or if you have a quite big meters of starvation or dehydration, then the game is probably about survival. It immediately catches the player's eye and focuses them on the things that you emphasize in user interface or via the way player interacts with that interface. And of course, most often used functionalities should be always as smooth and easy accessible as you can make them, because if a player makes a thing like 3 times in 10 minutes and he has to make it via 20 mouse clicks, he won't play your game. He probably just won't. It's people who played Dwarf Fortress may be an exception, but still. And yeah, players should the sooner the player feels familiar with the way he controls the game, the better, because he is immersed more easily if he does so. And art style. Art style is the visuals and hearing sound of the game. And the main thing here is that visuals always attract people to a game. If you see something visually appealing, not only in fidelity, but in a lot of cases, an art style that catches your eye, you immediately are attracted to the game and you want to explore what's further. Like one picture is more worth than 1,000 words. It's also the first contact with your game. When people scroll through any media, they tend to look at pictures, and pictures are connected with art style. It's it may be your logo or just a screen from your game. It's something that the player immediately catches. And of course, do not forget that sound design is an important part of that, because silent games have a certain atmosphere, and very loud game have another kind of atmosphere. So sound design is also always a part of art style, and it should correspond with that. And art style, of course, originates in players' perception. I see a dark place, it's dangerous, scary. I see bright colors and flowers, it's some kind of comfort zone. I see super deformed characters, it's a game for kids. Those are things that, like, almost immediately when browsing Steam, you immediately think of when you see a screenshot of a game. And of course, after the player purchases your game and plays the game, your art style should correspond with the theme. Dissonance can be used, but can be intended, and the game visuals can be very different from the actual theme of the game. There's a game named Doki Doki Literature Club, which is a visual novel, and it's colorful and bright. And not to spoil anything, it's not a happy story. I strongly recommend it. But one does not simply. I've seen a lot of projects that failed because the art style didn't match the actual theme of the game. And of course, it's an integral part of user experience, and it strongly interacts with user interface and UX. And last but not least, tone and narration. Atmosphere is a strong tool for impressing the player. It's something that can attract the player, can keep him engaged. It's communicated via visual and auditory communication, but not only that, it's also the language the game uses, the way the game communicates like verbally with the player. And tone and narration originates in players' feelings. The world is dark and people barely talk to each other. It's sad, it's depressing. I can feel something is wrong here. This is that tricky feeling to create in the player. I'm running through a candy land. It's so much fun. So the tone and narration basically define the setting, define the uh, substance that the player is submerged into. Fluff is always an important tool to give some context to the player, and the language of that fluff, the language of dialogues, is also something that strongly creates the atmosphere along with the art style. And a lot of it is usually invisible to the player. For example, in this War of Mine, we've had a full history of the country that the war takes place in, along with the political reasons for the war and the factions background and everything. And it was barely used in the game, but at least every single radio communication that the player receives and every single event that happened in this War of Mine were related to that fluff we created. They were all consistent because we've had the basics figured out what actually happened in the world. Even if you don't write it directly to the player, you should know what is happening in your game, like behind the scenes. And there is a quote by J.R.R. Tolkien that a story must be told, or there'll be no story. Yet it is the untold stories that are most moving. And I also heard, I couldn't find the source, but I also heard that he said that the author should know what's behind the mountains in the horizon. So your fluff, your view of the world you create should be broader than the actual characters in the world can see. In that way, you can create deeper setting. And these are basically our tools of the trade. These are the tools that we, as game developers, use to communicate our ideas, our visions to the rest of the world. And the combination of those elements creates a video game. And depending on what techniques you use, depending on what art style you choose, what mechanics, what genre, it defines the final product. So use them wisely. And of course, with great power comes great responsibility, but it also generates a lot of opportunities and a lot of freedom and a lot of fun, to be honest, because from what I know, making games is quite fun. So you have chosen everything and you have your vision and you start this game and you start making it. And now the problem comes with maintaining the vision throughout the project. So starting with pre-production phase, where the vision might not be yet truly forged, and this phase starts when the original idea is greenlit. So we want to make a game about that, or our distributor wants us to make this game, or the board members want us to make the game. So basically, when, yeah, this is something we want to share with the world. This phase ends with vertical slice, and by vertical slice, I mean part of the game where all the base mechanics are included, maybe not really polished, but they are there. And we start the actual production phase where we produce content. And the pre-production phase is the time of heavy prototyping and heavily verifying the vision. So it is a moment where you should verify whether the initial idea you had hold up. Does it fit the chosen genre? Is it fun to play? And what changes do you need to make in the vision or in the chosen channels of communication to make it a fun game? So during that, every prototype has to have defined goals, and those goals should always correspond to what the game is about. Uh, with them, it's easier to predict when the prototype is ready, if the chosen goal is fulfilled. It makes the development more focused. So when we say that this prototype should have the best movement we can make, then every single developer works towards that goal. And it's easier to track progress by tracking the fulfillment of the predefined goals. So the goals should describe key gameplay elements with limited scope. And the limit is that you need to make, depending on the prototype, but the first prototypes you need to make just enough to verify the value you actually are adding to the game. And from my experience and the way we do things, prototype should always be a playable game. So no like tech demo or something. We don't make game engines, we make games. So if something is considered a prototype, it should already be a game, playable to some degree, maybe simple, but still we make games, so even prototypes should be games. Example goals of our prototypes. In this war of mine, the first prototype included day and night circle, scavenging, some civilian needs like hunger and thirst, and basic art style direction. It evolved in time, but it was there. The prototype wasn't like on gray boxes. It already consisted some elements of what we wanted to create. Then there was shelter development, combat, economy, etc., etc. In Frostpunk, we started from creating a competent city builder, and the first prototype consisted basically the mechanics of the economy and how citizens behave, like going to work and going back and so on and so on. Once again, art style was included in that prototype, very basic, but like just the direction. Then we added narration and plotline. The first one failed, which I will talk about in a moment. Book of laws and like getting down to citizens, because in the first prototype, as a city builder, it was very, very far from the actual people, and getting down to citizens in the form of like those decision screens and so on was the thing in that prototype. And last but not least, we've created forms of government, consequences, exploration, and the actual ending of the game, because Frostpunk didn't have an ending until very, very late in production. Along with the main goals, you should also define secondary goals. So as the prototype phase is awesome for iterating things, then some things that usually take longer to develop to grow up should be iterated also. So you should iterate on user interface and experience, on art style, on technological approach, on those things that aren't really taken as a hard goal, but they need to be iterated and checked many, many times. So use this time of prototyping to iterate them. Deadlines in the pre-production phase are more flexible, but you shouldn't ever create a milestone that has no deadline, because that prolongs the development and make it fuzzy, and you will quickly get out of scope, out of time, out of money, out of food, out of work, probably also. So yeah, they can be flexible, but always have a deadline. You can always postpone it or not. That's a decision to make, but always have that we need to finish that by the end of the month or something like that. And after the prototyping phase, happens something that we in 11-bit call finding the game. So after some prototype, some early prototype, we everyone in the team can state that there is a game here. It's very hard to explain what I mean by that. It's a feeling that what you have created is consistent, all the basic mechanics work well, and you have fun playing it. And you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing this, and it might be clunky, but you see that there is a game here. If we polish it, if we move it further and further, then we can make a great game from that. And the change from a game into the game is the core process for developing the vision, because the first sentence is there is a game here, and you want to make this a game into the game you wanted to create with your vision. Of course, this first game should also support the vision, but getting from a playable prototype and enjoyable prototype to the things that you actually wanted to say in the first place is the core of development. And during that process and during the whole development cycle, you will come to tough decisions, mainly considering abandoning game features. And in the pre-production, it's part of the process. Later, it might be more costly, but I I think that sometimes it is necessary, because if the feature does not support the vision of the game, you have two options basically: redefine the vision to fit the new feature, or abandon the feature so that the vision remains intact. All other solutions either will distract the player in the end or lead to unfocused development. So we won't know what we are actually doing, what game is actually the goal here. And there is a psychological effect called sunk cost fallacy. So I have already invested that much in this that it's very hard to leave. It happens in relationships between people. It also happens in economy, and it happens in game features. So people tend to value game features that are already in the game by the effort put in the development. So we've spent a year developing that, so it must be good, and we can't get rid of that. So abandoning such feature is a very tough choice, because in the first place, you have to admit that this feature was a mistake in one way or another, but still. And then this is a decision of about throwing away weeks or sometimes even months of teams, or at least part of the team work. And it's always throwing something that works, because to see that something is not fitting is sometimes happen very late. You are throwing away working mechanics, which is always a tough choice. So games tend to be very complex, and it is hard for them to create a consistent product. That's why a lot of games aren't good products, aren't good games, and those that are have to be very focused on what they are actually doing. So if a feature distracts the player from the main focus, abandon it. If the feature does not fit the base concept, the message of the game, abandon it. This applies to design, art, sometimes even code. And we've had during the production a lot of those choices. Both our projects, This War of Mine and Frostpunk, went through an early vision overhaul. So some of the mechanics were naturally thrown out because the vision changed. But even with the new vision, This War of Mine, for example, had advanced combat mechanics. You could pick up different weapons, you had different kinds of ammunition, you had like body armor, helmets, boots, and so on. And we noticed that with those mechanics that were fully implemented, the game is not about survival anymore. It's about getting the better gear to get the better resources. And that was something that we tried to avoid in the first place because you are not a warrior in This War of Mine. The other feature was production chains in Shelter. Shelter is pretty much basic in This War of Mine, and we've had a lot of production chains. So there were a lot of upgrades, a lot of different machines, and once again, the game stopped being a survival game. It became something like creating the best shelter, the best engine to cope with the world, something like Factorio, for example. And that is not the what the game is about. If you wanted to tell a story about survival, including those production chains would distract the player, would make it like Factorio in war. So with Frostpunk, we've had also advanced production chains and economy, and that distracted once again the player from the actual issues we wanted to tackle with. So with the mood of the society, with the social problems there, and so on and so on. There was very elaborate expedition mechanics where you needed to supply your scouts and you needed to provide them with food, get better slave for them, and so on and so on. But the game became like your city's purpose was to equip the best expedition that you could. So the game was no longer about the city. The game became about exploring the world, and that was not something that we wanted to make. And there also was the first storyline in Frostpunk was a prophet storyline. It was a good thing. There was a prophet that wanted to return to New London. Some of it remains in Frostpunk, to Old London. I'm sorry. And this prophet storyline was fine, but we've noticed that we've made like visual novel inside an economy game. So the narration was on one track and the actual gameplay was on another track. So it really didn't fit. And if everything fails, you can always cancel the project. It's the last resort, and I don't recommend doing that, especially early in your career. It's better to finish the project and see what things went good and what things were right. But we at 11-bit, I'm not allowed actually to talk about them, but we scrapped quite a few projects during my time there. So the thing is, when you actually are scrapping the project, are canceling it, try to salvage the most you can. So maybe a new idea can utilize the genre of the game, so the basic mechanics works, or you can reuse some assets, some setting things. Always try to salvage the work that you've already done, because like canceling the project is throwing everything into the waste bin, basically. And of course, at least in case of 11-bit studios, there is business relevance that can be a factor in canceling or not canceling any particular project. So I would end with a quote from Frank Herbert: "Fear is the mind killer. Do not fear, because it will stop you from doing great things. Stick to your vision, stick to your idea of the game, and make it good." Thank you very much. That's all from me, and I'm of course open to questions.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're
If
muted,
anyone has,
Daniela.
if anyone has a question, write in chat, or they can unmute and say it outright.
Yes, can I ask a question? I was wondering, like, particularly this last part where you were talking about how sometimes when the game is going outside of the vision, you have to cancel things. I was wondering because this is very subjective, and sometimes because of the sunk cost fallacy, people in your team will always agree that the things that you're doing is within the vision of the game. So do you go towards, like, do you do play testing? Because what I'm getting at is, how do you realize that that this is happening within the same company? If you're working in the same project, how do you get outside perspective regarding the projects? Do you know what I mean?
First of all, we usually don't get the outside perspective until we are sure that the game is here. So we want to show um, outside world quite polished game, as usually outside testers are not game developers, and they tend to not realize that they are playing a prototype and that this is unfinished, and they don't have the idea of what is going to happen afterwards. So during the phases, we usually stick to our guns, stick to the people within the project, and whether to cancel it or not, whether to abandon a feature or not, it's our internal decision. And when we use outside testers, we basically try to check things like, is the game communicating well? Is the player actually doing what we want him to do? Is he focused on the things that we want him to be focused? Those are the things that we want to check. And then we adjust our communication channels, the clarity of the game, and the level of difficulty, and so on and so on.
Thank you. Perfect.
I also have a question. Sadly, recently we had to kill one of our projects here at GameDev Técnico. It was sadly due to lack of motivation, among other things, lack of time. And the thing is, I was leading the project and I saw it coming because the features we were implementing started to go far from our first idea. My question is if you could develop a bit further on where is the time to kill a project, even when it's already a bit more developed.
It's always a bad time to kill a project. One of our projects that we killed was basically a working game with quite polished art style, and we realized that people don't get how to play it. So it was a small game. It was during the time that 11-bit studios made mobile games. So people who actually started playing it, even within the studio, didn't know what to do. And that was the core mechanics of the game. They couldn't get it. So it was very late to cancel that project. And after that, I think that the board learned that if they want to cancel something, they should do it earlier, because it's costly. It's always costly. So our goal right now is to try to catch the basic idea as early as we can during the prototyping phase. So that's why I told that every prototype should be a playable game. It's in some way complete. Then you can verify whether the vision sticks. Is it playable? Does mechanics work well together? So yeah, the earlier the better. But to come to a realization that this project needs to be cancelled is always a hard choice. And I don't think that there is a knowledge to be learned. It's an experience to have. The more experienced you are in game development, the more you see when you can't fix something. It's too much distracted, broken, and so on.
Does it get easier with time to kill projects?
No. It's easier to make the decision, but it's always the same feeling, and it's a shitty feeling.
Okay. Well, there's a question in chat. why is discussing a cancelled project such a taboo? How it not benefit the company and the community to share this knowledge, or is the idea of canceling a project still viewed as a failure instead of an opportunity for learning?
Well, first of all, you lose money when you cancel the project. So that's why it is like objectively bad. And yeah, it is an opportunity to learn, maybe for the company, definitely for the people there. And to be honest, when you have like Ubisoft that cancels an already announced project, the backlash from the community is huge. So we probably don't even know what projects are canceled inside even the main studios, because usually when they get out with the project, they won't cancel it. They will do anything just not have the backlash from the community. So yeah, it is an opportunity to learn early in small projects, like small teams that are making the first game or the second game. Yeah, but the bigger the projects are, the harder it gets. The costs are, they overweight the actual experience and opportunity to learn.
Okay, I think that answers the question. Thank you very much.
Hopefully.
It's always so hard to discuss this type of things because it's not only the leads, everyone feels it as a failure, and people don't like discussing failures, or well, it's always hard. Does anyone have any more questions?
There's a question in the YouTube chat from
Ooh.
Renata Candeias, which asks, do you ever recycle the thrown out ideas for other projects?
Yes, we recycled with basically with Frostpunk. We canceled the previous game. It was an area-based city builder. Of course, we started developing Frostpunk, but to be absolutely honest, the former project was canceled, and a lot of people working on that just went out of the company. So yeah, we salvage what we can from the pre-existing project. When we had our own tech, parts of the engine developed during those canceled projects were used elsewhere. Right now, with Unreal, we have too little experience with that, but probably it would be the same. The tools that we would create for one project would remain in another project. And we've had a situation that an idea remained and the gameplay beneath it changed a few times. And yeah, we try to salvage whatever we can. If it's good regardless if the project is canceled or not.
I have another question, if I may. Do we still have time, Daniela?
Of course.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I was wondering where to stop prototyping. You talked about that when you think that you found the game, so when other people are playing the game and you think they found it, we can stop. We have this problem here where we participate in a lot of game jams. So what we have is like lots of different small prototypes of game ideas that could have potential in the future. And some of them we think we have them, so we can keep developing. But a lot of them, well, first of all, they're kind of lots of bugs in there, but we are trying to see how to evaluate where the team should continue working after the game jam, or if they should stop. We usually leave it up to the team, but do you have like any practical guide about where to stop prototyping?
I think the main thing is that when you see that adding anything is making the game overcomplicated or derailed. There is a quote, I like quotes. There's a quote that engineering is not the process of adding things needed, but removing those that are not needed. Mm-hmm. So if there is a mechanic that isn't like really a fun thing to do by the player, or is not supporting the idea of the game, or even distracts players from actually playing what you want them to play, doing what you want them to do, then first of all, do not add it. And when you have that, start production, start producing. There are always mechanics that will come along when you see that something is missing, but the prototyping phase should end when you have a feeling that what you have can clearly communicate the vision to this is the game you want to make. If you have walking and shooting, yeah, cool. If the game is about traversing the world, if you can jump, that's probably basically it. If you have the feeling of like running and jumping, cool. Move on from that. Add levels. When you add levels and try to, this is already a production phase. When you add levels, you'll get into a problem that the levels would be more or less boring. And there are always features that are added during the production. It's not like you have the prototype and that's all. The vertical slice and it's set in stone, nothing more will happen. Maybe with AAA titles it is this way, but I don't think so either, to be honest.
Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Okay, now we don't have more time for any questions. But I wanted to thank you very much, Aleksander. It's the first presentation made by a speaker from 11-bit Studio, and we're very thankful for the partnership. I think it's the latest one we got. Correct me, Fabio, if I'm wrong. Yes, so we are very thankful for this opportunity to hear you and for such a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aleksander. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure. So goodbye.
Bye.
See you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have Willson Moreira from Miniclip. Are you ready, Willson?
Yes. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey. Can I just start sharing my screen or?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yep, it's perfect.
Great. All right. So as you know, I'm Willson Moreira from Miniclip. I'm a CRM specialist working in titles such as 8-Ball Pool, Agario, Soccer Stars, and Mini Militia. My main focus right now is on 8-Ball Pool, and I'm mainly concerned with 8-Ball Pool's live ops calendar and planning and the game's monetization. And that is what I'm here to talk about today. Monetizing mobile games, or as I like to call it, whale hunting. So I wanted to start this with a question. It's a rhetorical question, but a surgeon and a CEO got into a fight. Who won? It's the gaming company. And what I mean by this is that the best way to generate revenue is to get two wealthy players to compete against each other and then to offer them the opportunity to have a slight advantage if they pay for it. And this is particularly relevant because particularly in the mobile game industry, the top 10% of spenders contribute 50% of a game's revenue. That is why you see the trend towards adding microtransactions to everything come up. And as future game designers, I'm sure that everyone here loves video games, and the majority of you probably agrees that the trend towards microtransactions and launching games as a service is doing a disservice to the video game service to beloved IPs. But on the other hand, I think it's important to realize that so that we can do what we love and what we're good at, we also need to and want to be paid for it. And it means that the companies that we work for or the games that we go on to launch need to make money. And some games like Minecraft, Stardew Valley, and Shovel Knight can make money without adding microtransactions just because they were incredible indie games that generated a huge fandom, but that's not always the case. So it's relevant to add monetization mechanics when we want to launch a successful game, particularly in the mobile space. And I don't know if you know, but the mobile space is actually the largest sector of the gaming industry right now. So it represents 50% of the market with $85 billion, while the whole marketing total represents $165 billion. it's always a crazy statistic to see that the console and PC market combined do not get to the revenue that the mobile games market currently generates. But that begs the question, how do we monetize mobile games, which is what I am here to talk about today. So there are two ways of making money on game features. There are two models, let's say. You can go with a hype model, which is all about creating a need that is possible to fulfill and it instantly shows its values to players. Or you can go with a growth model that creates a need that is impossible to fulfill and continuously shows its value. And then if you check the chart there on the left, you'll see that the revenue curve that these two types of strategy generate are very different, right? While the hype model generates spikes, such as if you introduce a new hero in a MOBA that requires you to spend premium currency or make an in-app purchase to acquire that hero, let's say Mobile Legends, you'd see that curve, right? There's a huge spike when the hero launches because people want to acquire it, and then it starts decreasing. While if you go with a feature that it's just not about a purchase that you make, but about the system that you need to progress towards, you see that the revenue just starts to constantly increase over time. But each type of these models have different advantages. So the hype model obviously offers quick returns. It's easier to measure the rate of success. It's way easier to design. It's flat, but it's less stable and highly volatile. So that is not necessarily an advantage. It's planned on the short term and it's harder to control. The value growth model, return on investment takes time. It takes more time to evaluate. It's harder to design, but it's more stable, it's more predictable, and it's long term, and it's easier to control. So to give you two examples, one for each type. A gacha, where you add a new item, is a clear example of a hype model type of feature, where you just add the gacha, you see that spike in revenue decreases over time. Although you need to have a lot of low value items so that the gacha can actually bring you any return on investment. Otherwise, you risk messing up your entire game economy. We'll talk about that in a second. But every use of the gacha leads the players to their goals. And something also interesting about gacha is that the illusion of randomness is better than real randomness, which is to say that it should not just be that you have a 1% chance of getting that item. Ideally, the more gacha you open, that percentage should increase over time so that you actually get a higher chance with each box. Mostly because consumers do not particularly like to see real randomness, although they think they do. And then there's the value growth model example, which is segmented offers. So it could be a system that surfaces offers to players based on their payment history or their style of pay within boundaries that you set. This can be a machine learning model that tells you that if the player is playing a particular type of game model, then you should offer him a particular type of item or bundle. Or it can be segmentation at the pricing level. So let's say if a player is making purchases of $49.99 every single month, the offers you show that player could be different to the offers that you show to a player that has never spent or that is spending $2.99 a month or is just buying your season pass. But which model is better? In reality, you can make it of both. So when designing free-to-play economies, you basically need bite-sized intermediating goals to create addictive achieve reward loops. You need to have your players have the ability to periodically progress in your main content. And ideally, you should introduce grind, which is basically a time gates that are gradually introduced, or power gates, so that you actually need to upgrade something so that you can keep progressing through content. And obviously, you need to offer the player the option to pay to skip the grind, so that you can satisfy your needs to consume content immediately, and you're basically restoring momentum. And when we mention this, then it's relevant to also consider spend depth. So you have a mobile game full of content. So spend depth is basically how much would a whale speeding through your game have to spend to consume every content there is and become the most powerful player there is. Again, this is something that is very relevant to consider when creating a mobile game, because again, 10% of spenders generate 50% of the revenue. And I have an example here from Empire and Puzzles, which is a match-3 RPG. So an RPG with Candy Crush Saga type gameplay that has two types of goals. They have town management goals, which are regular goals that you've seen in a lot of games, like Farmville, for instance. And then they also have legendary heroes. And you can acquire those heroes, and then you can also upgrade. And in total, for you to consume all the content there is in the game, you'd need to spend about, rounding it at $500,000. And it's interesting to see how the split was done here. So the town management goals, you need $15,000 so that you can get everything that you need at max level. But when it comes to heroes, you need to spend a lot. And it's also interesting that you can actually unlock all heroes that are in the game for 100,000, and that it's that upgrading cost that is more expensive. And this is relevant when designing the video game as well, because it's actually more cheaper to introduce more levels to your existing characters than it is to create a new character. So you should always consider all goals that you have in your game, as well as how much a user would need to spend to fully achieve them without grinding. So basically, we need to consider amount of content in the game. We need to use time gating and power gating if possible. And we need to increase spend depth by adding new goals and features and analyzing which goals can produce geometric gains, like I was saying. So we're repeating existing goals that apply to everything, and then you basically just add a small piece of content to the game that increases spend depth a lot more than, say, just a new hero that it does not give you a geometric gain. I have Marvel Snap here on the left, because Marvel Snap is a recently launched mobile game that uses all of these features. So the amount of content is staggering. It's a collectible card game centered around the Marvel universe, and basically they have cards for every hero that you can possibly imagine, and a lot that you haven't even ever heard of. They have time gating in daily missions, weekly missions, and also seasonal missions. So their season pass includes missions that they are dividing as chapters, and basically you need to wait a certain amount of days so that you can start playing with missions. They also have power gating, so that you can upgrade cards, and when you upgrade the cards, you actually climb in your collection level, and it's the only way to acquire new cards is to increase your collection level. And finally, there's spend depth, in the sense that each card has a lot of levels. So it's like common, rare, epic, ultra, legendary. It's 5 or 6 levels. And that means that for each new card you add to the game, you increase the number of goals by 6. And if you ever want to add a new type of rarity, you will basically again be making use of those geometric gains, and you can spend that by a lot with minimal effort. So far we talked about designing free-to-play economies, but when you have a robust free-to-play economy, what can you do to nudge players to pay? How can you hunt whales? Something that we have to consider is that there is a strange correlation between time to make your first purchase and whether you'll become a very high spender, a medium spender, or a low spender. So whales, dolphins, are minnows. And this is a relevant information to have, because it means that you also need to have enough content for the player to reach that time where they played enough to feel like they want to spend, but there's still a lot of content to progress. So basically, you need to have enough content to hook the player, to have the player make playing your game become an habit, and finally an hobby. And the type of offers that you offer at each of these stages is different, right? So when you're in the hook phase, you're offering a starter pack. So it's basically a deal that offers insane value, or that is very aspirational, as in the case of the 8-ball pool example I have there, where we're selling cosmetics. And these have to do with partial types that I'll speak about next. When it's a habit, you're selling progress. So in the 8-ball pool case, you need to acquire coins to play in higher tables, and higher tables will offer you better queues in their boxes, because every time you win, you get a gacha box for free. Then you can wait a few minutes or a few hours, depending on where you are, to open it, or you can just spend premium currency to open it immediately. And finally, when it's a hobby, you can just actually sell consumables. And this is where you get unlimited upper spend. Regarding the barter type that I was speaking earlier when I talked about monetization through aspirational items, we have 4 types of players, right? We have the killers, the achievers, the socialites, and the explorers. And each of these types of players focus on something different and has a different motivation when playing a game. So killers are obviously focused on winning and on direct peer-to-peer competition. Achievers focus on attaining status and achieving goals. Socialites are basically players that focus on socializing and trying to develop a network of friends. And then explorers want to discover the unknown. And the type of in-app purchase that you make for each of these types of players is also different, right? So for achievers, you're selling progress. For socializers, you're actually selling customization, which is where the aspirational items come in. So you can be selling avatars, in-game item skins, emotes, all of that, dances in the case of Fortnite. To killers, you are selling competitive advantage, and to explorers, you're selling content. And the reason why I have the achievers highlighted is because selling convenience so that they can progress faster is where the majority of the revenue from a mobile game comes in, which makes us need to be very focused on progression. So there should be 4 ways for a player to progress. There should be skill, luck, and obviously grinding and paying. And we need to make sure that the player understands that grinding and pay are options. And it's also relevant that we shouldn't make a game very skill-based if you want to monetize it with in-app purchases, because very skilled games make it harder for make players to pay, because they have very little reason to, right? They can just get better at the game instead of having that luck, that luck element that is ensuring that even if you're a very good player, sometimes you still do need to play to pay to progress anyway. And again, collectible card games are a very good example of this. If you take a look at Legend of Runeterra or Marvel Snap or Hearthstone, you'll see that all of these games are introducing elements of randomness, so that even if you are the best card player there is, sometimes you'll just lose. And then obviously card games have an element of randomness inherent to the order of the cards you're drawing. But this also means that you need to keep adding new content, because progress creates a need for new content. On the left here, I have the example of 8-ball pool's core loop. So basically, the core loop of 8-ball pool is that you play the game, which removes coins from your wallet, which is our soft currency. When you win, you get chests, and when you open those chests, you get few pieces, and you also got experience points and more coins. As you do so, you unlock new tiers, and that is basically the loop that you have here. So players are just on a loop to unlock new tiers, like collect new cues, and they're rewarded for it. And here, obviously, luck and skill have an element as well. Skill is because you actually need to know how to play the game, and luck, for instance, who breaks first is, although we have a formula for it, it's still somewhat something that you can attribute to luck, and if you do so, whoever breaks first has the advantage if you're a really good player. And that means that even if you have a lot of coins in your wallet, you may lose a few games in a row, which may give you the need to try to acquire more coins by either grinding or paying, which are, again, both options. So basically, content drives revenue. Here is an example of Rival Kingdoms event calendar. And there's like a clear direct correlation between adding new content to the game and the following revenue spike. And although you can clearly see that these events are sort of following the hype model, where you see the spiking revenue and then they immediately decrease, which means that you need to keep adding new content and new events to the game if you want to keep seeing those spikes that are actually basically increasing the average revenue you're making per month. So the best monetization features basically introduce content. So season passes are obviously one of the most popular monetization methods in mobile games and even computer games nowadays alike. They actually generate a significant share of most mobile games revenues, and the top 20% of mobile games right now, 60% of them feature season passes. Gacha mechanics are also very common. They're more common than battle passes. For instance, in Japan, they are featured in 93% of the top 20% of grossing titles, and obviously in-app offers, which are the most established monetization feature. And then I have examples from a pool from Miniclip here. So this is our season pass, our gacha mechanic, which is called the surprise boxes, and a in-app offer for our recent Halloween event. So what makes it so that these features monetize so well? Well, season passes are core for successful mobile games, and one of the reasons that they are so widespread is that they can actually be added to most mobile games without affecting the core loop of the game, right? They're actually incentivizing you to keep engaging with the core loop, because usually you progress in the season pass by playing the game and doing what the designers already intended you to do. So you don't need to be adding additional mechanics like you do for specific time limited events, for instance. So as I was saying, it doesn't affect the core loop. It increases retention and the sense of accomplishment, because you need to keep coming back, and you basically have a goal, which is to finish the season in a certain amount of time before it ends. And it obviously adds direct and indirect boosts to monetization. Direct, because the premium passes usually resemble a subscription, because you need to renew it each season, and with the exception of a few games, you actually do not get the ability to acquire a follow-up season if you complete the previous one by engaging a lot with the game. And indirect monetization, because as you increase engagement and play time, you're also exposing users to your other monetization methods. And gotchas, as I was saying, these are increasingly more relevant. And the reason why these features are booming the way they are is that this system is one of the most effective ways for developers to monetize their mobile games, and particularly free-to-play ones in which you're incentivizing downloads. And the randomness that is inherent to the feature, where players are basically opening the boxes in return for in-game assets, keeps players hooked, because you're always looking for the next item that you really want to acquire, and maybe it's in the next open that you're going to be getting. And finally, we have the in-app offers, which, as I said before, is the most established monetization feature. They usually offer discounts or they bundle offers together and are available only for a limited time. And there are multiple reasons that make them useful. They're ubiquitous across genres and geographical markets, unlike certain features such as progressive in-app rewards that are more common in the Eastern mobile games market, although they're becoming more common in the West now that Diablo Immortal has launched and they offer similar in-app offer mechanics. They're one of the most established monetization features, and there is a fair amount of innovation in terms of implementation, like the progressive in-app rewards that I was just mentioning. So for those who don't know, progressive in-app rewards are basically an in-app that you pay up front, a fee, let's say it's $9.99, doesn't matter. And the in-app is actually giving you access to goals. So that what it makes it so that when you reach level, let's say 15 with your character, you're going to get this reward. When you reach level 20, you're going to get the 25 and so on, but you only get it if you pay previously. So it's basically like a growth plan, let's say. And it's something that is only now being adopted in the West. So in-apps can also be created via core gameplay, in which you're offering players help in core gameplay challenges or through meta layers. So basically allowing the player to progress or engage in the long term. And the traditional way to monetize in casual games has been through core gameplay. So again, if you think of Candy Crush Saga, they would be monetizing through energy and boosters. But casual games have been picking up more hardcore games monetizing mechanics lately. So you see meta layers becoming increasingly more common. And that is also an interesting thing because usually more hardcore games have a tougher time monetizing players in terms of conversion rate, which is the percentage of your players that are actually paying. But those that are paying usually pay higher amounts than casual games. So basically there is a difference between monetizing by volume or by lifetime value. You see in the experience of the casual versus hardcore continuum. And then you see that casual games and more mid-core games are trying to adopt some strategies to increase the average spend that their players make and do not just be there for a numbers game. So essentially creating more levels. Effective in-app offers also play with the emotions and motivations of the player. So for instance, you can play with exclusivity, surprise, urgency, progression, social needs, and personalization. So an example of exclusivity is the player feels like that is the only way to get their hands on the character scheme. A surprise, it's obviously very tied to gachas, and it might be getting a valuable character for very little investment because gachas are usually cheap and you have the chance to get very high value items. Urgency, so this is playing with scarcity. That's why most offers are time limited. So you either buy them when they're available or you need to wait for the next time they come in rotation, and depending on the game, that can be a long time. So social mechanics is, let's say, imagine that you have an offer where if a certain amount of players purchases that offer, everyone that purchases it gets a character skin. So it's a social gimmick on top of an in-app purchase. Progression is very self-explanatory, and so it's personalization. And finally, something that I also wanted to mention is that there is a correlation between monetization mechanics that is interesting when designing mobile games. So basically, we can see that if you're thinking of introducing a type of mechanic to the game, then you should probably also introduce a different type of mechanic. For instance, there is a strong relationship between games that offer subscriptions and ad removal. which means that there is a strong relation between games that offer subscriptions and interstitials, which are the little ads that you see after you play a match. There is a strong relation between games that offers live ops services, so that work as games as a service, and gotcha. And this basically gives you an idea of, okay, I'd like to make this game. I would like to have these features, so that means I should also probably make that. And it's an interesting statistical analysis to make and to be in action. So some key takeaways is that we should always look beyond the game and the target market for inspiration. For instance, the in-app progressive rewards that I mentioned, they've got popular in the Eastern markets, and they are now coming to the West exactly because of it. We should think about emotions and motivations to attach to features and to in-app purchases. And something that I did not ever mention here, but that is something that I wanted to highlight, is that we should also remember that ad monetization is an option. I mostly focus on in-app purchases because that is my specialty, but ad monetization can be used solely or alongside in-app purchases to monetize games with larger audiences. That's it from me. I don't know if you guys have any questions, but
well, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very insightful. A lot of us, at least myself, have a love-hate relationship with monetization in games. I don't want to spend money, but I want the pretty skins. I don't know if there's any questions here or in the Discord.
I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
So what happens usually here at GameDev Técnico is that we make a game for a jam, and then we usually either forget it or try to spend some time on it. And at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about like how there's two types of games and how you can make money from these games. And I know that like Miniclip is huge, and I know you guys have tons of metrics that you can use to evaluate if a game is good for optimization or not. I was wondering if there is like an easy way to, if you made a small game, to understand if this has potential to be well, to be monetized and to grow. And I was wondering what was your thoughts about it.
Yeah, so the first metric we look at are engagement metrics, because if you are not engaging your players, they're not going to be paying for your game. So we look at how the daily active users are trending. We look at return rates. So basically, what is the share of your users that are returning to your game day after day? And we look at retention rates, which are somewhat similar, but we cohort all users. So let's say that 100,000 users joined our game today on the 5th of November. 7 days from now, we will see what is the share of those users that are still playing the game. And then we'll do that for 14 days, 30 days, 90 days. And that is going to give us the day 7, day 14, day 30 retention rates. If a game has good metrics such as these, and so if it's showing a good trend in these metrics, I mean, we look more in depth into average session length, average number of matches per session. We do analysis on the economy itself. So let's say that if you have a premium currency and a soft currency, you can start looking at what is the median wallet for users and look at it per deciles. You can see what is the source of those currencies. So are users getting it through the core gameplay? Are they paying for it? Are they getting it through ad rewards? And these last takeaways that we try to get, they're not necessarily telling you if the game will monetize properly. They will be telling you if there is an issue or not with the game's economy. And if there is, you can start fixing it. If there's not, and if the game shows good retention metrics and good engagement metrics, you can start to build on top of it. And I guess that the core metric that we have in our games is ARPDAU and ARPU. So ARPDAU is the average revenue per daily active user. And then if you look at it over a larger period of time, we look at it as average revenue per user that was active during that period of time. But those are the key metrics that we look at. It's basically engagement mechanics, engagement metrics, monetization metrics such as ARPU and ARPDAU, and then economy metrics such as the source of premium and soft currency.
Cool, thank you. I think either Fabio or
Yeah, I can. Hello, thank you for the presentation. In the middle or the beginning, I don't remember, you mentioned the new Marvel game, the Snap.
Yes.
And I started playing that game, and it has in terms of monetization, a very different approach for monetizing that. For when you look at all the card games that exist, the monetization is you pay, the card gets stronger. But in this game, the cards cannot get stronger; they just get prettier. What do you think the difference in terms of monetization it will bring to Snap, and how different games will react to it?
I think it has to do with that card that I was speaking at the beginning of the game. So I actually play a lot of card games. That's why the examples in this presentation mentioned card games often. And if you look at Hearthstone or Legends of Runeterra, their systems requiring cards is simply you buy packs, right? And if you pay, it's not that the cards get stronger; it's that the cards that you have access to get better. Usually they don't allow you to upgrade your cards so that it gets stronger. Although Clash Royale does that, they allow you to get stronger cards. So, but that is a more casual card game. And I think that if you look at Hearthstone and Legends of Runeterra, you'll see that curve where they actually keep needing to add new content to their game. So because you launch a new expansion, a lot of players are going to be buying those packs so that they get the cards they want, and then once they get it, you see that decrease in revenue. So the curve would again look like something like this in the red here. While Marvel Snap, that's not the way it works, because you actually cannot just go into the game and spend $1,000 and have all the cards, because they are introducing those content, those time gates and those power gates that I mentioned previously. So you can't just pay to upgrade a card in there. You need to collect a resource which they call power boosters by playing the game. And if you do not have those resources, they're in the shop there, they offer you the ability to upgrade 3 cards every 8 hours. These are random. By spending premium currency that you need to acquire using another premium currency that you need to pay for. So they're usually using something which is called material distortion, so that you need to exchange your currency, so in this case your euros, several times, so that by the end you don't know how many euros you're spending to upgrade that card. But because they are adding that time gating in which you need to wait until your card that you want to in the store, and that power gating, and they're limiting the amount that you can spend initially, I think that you'll be seeing a curve that looks a lot like this. And one of the advantages is that if you compare the community feedback when it comes to Marvel Snap and when it comes to Magic Arena or Legends of Runeterra or Hearthstone, you'll see that the community will tell you that the game is a lot more free-to-play friendly than the other games are, which is not necessarily the case, because it's just that the way that they're extracting their money per player is slower. So instead of you spiking your spending and not spending, you spend a little bit more over time. So it's a little bit like a metaphor of, I don't know if you guys ever heard how you cook a frog. You basically increase the temperature a little over time, and they will not notice that the temperature is big increase. And I think that is the strategy that Second Dinner is going with their Marble Snap game.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I don't know if you can answer my question. Even though I'm part of GameDev Técnico, my background in terms of studies is more towards data science and analytics. And seeing this presentation, we can really see the role that this part of the gaming industry plays in the industry. So could you give us an insight of how you have an analytics team? How do you interact with them? How does this work? How does this part of
we have a huge analytics team.
Okay.
So it really depends on what you're analyzing, right? So we introduce new game features, and we also have live ops. So introducing new items, new events to the game, new goals that are time limited. And the way that we interact with the analytic teams changes a little depending on what the goal is. For instance, features introduced to the game should always be A/B tested. While time-limited events, by their very nature, shouldn't, right? Because if you introduce a new event to the game and only 80% of the population has access to it, those that don't would be very upset, and you obviously have an uproar. So if we're launching a game features and we're running an A/B test, we are going to be asking the analytics teams to look again into engagement metrics, monetization metrics, and economy metrics. So those are always our key types, right? And for every feature, we will see reports that focus on those three metrics and also on cannibalization. So the way, imagine that you're adding a new piggy bank mechanic to a game. And you see that that piggy bank is generating a certain amount of revenue per day. It's not enough to just go and see where that revenue is coming from. You also need to see if that is additional revenue or if players simply stop spending in a certain feature to spend in that feature. And if that is the case, you need to see if the new feature, for instance, would be creating an hangover period. So what is the amount of time that you need to spend money on this new feature in a particular period versus in the previous period? So if you're, let's say, if it's a piggy bank and if you're flooding the economy with soft currency, how long does it take for that user to spend that currency and need to spend again, versus the feature that you stopped spending money on? Because sometimes it may look like something is a great feature in the short term. So let's say you generate $500,000 in a day, but then you go and see that you're actually generating a lot less in all the subsequent days because you're actually just creating a larger hangover period. And the other feature that you cannibalize, maybe it didn't generate a huge spike, but because you generated consistent revenue at the end of the year, your game will be generating more. So we need to look at those cannibalization reports. We need to look at engagement metrics over time and monetization metrics over time. And then we also need to look at it for particular segments, because we use segmentation in a lot of our games. If we just go and look at how the feature is performing, we are risking confusing the trees for the forest, right? And then maybe the feature that is working really well for the majority of your players is not working so well for a subsegment that is relevant to you. And we basically need to talk with our game analytics team to look into all of these, to exactly try to understand the purchase behavior and the player behavior of all of our users. We also talk with them a lot when creating new features. about which events we want to track, because obviously tracking events comes to a cost. All those events need to be stored in a database in Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. It doesn't matter where they each will charge you for the amount of data that you are storing and accessing. And so we need to pick which data we believe is relevant for each feature. We work very closely with the game analytics team to define this. And then this is all for features, right? For live ops, it's a little bit different. For live ops, there are no A/B tests. You cannot know if what would your result have been if you did not have that event. It's impossible. You can try to extrapolate it, but the confidence that you have on the data will never be as high. And so we focus a lot more on economy trends. And there we're seeing, okay, so if the goal of this event is to decrease the premium currency in a user's wallet, what is the share of currency spent that was coming from the context that this event introduced, or if the goal is to get the users to engage more with the game, did the average number of matches increase, or if we have a new, I don't know, item that you can also get pieces of to upgrade it. If you watch ads, did that revenue increase? So that the reports are a little bit less standardized, and the things that we look at are very dependent on the goal of that particular live ops event. But basically, BI and game analytics are definitely key parts of everything that we do at Miniclip, because data always tells a story, right? And if you don't listen to the data and you're flying blind, you risk making a very good game into a poor experience, simply because you did not look at the trends of how it was being worked and how it shifted over time.
So with this back and forth, do you think you could do monetization without an analytics team, or
No.
is it out of the question? Yeah.
Out of the question. You can do poor monetization without an analytics team.
Okay.
But without looking at the game's data to see exactly what the monetization tactics you're introducing to the game are doing to the economy, you are always risking basically harming the game in the long term for a short-term gain.
Okay, so basically we need an analytics team and GameDev Técnico.
If you guys use in-app purchases, or yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so are there any more questions on YouTube?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
It's about the ethics when you're monetizing a game through gambling systems. There's some countries that are already banning those games, and there's also those stories where either a kid spent like thousands of dollars with parents' money, or it's a person who they're addicted. It's like the point of these games is to addict them, to create that habit of them wanting to play, and then feeling like they need to spend every time more and more money to keep getting better. And some of these people make really just wrong decisions, financial decisions, and it can ruin them. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
I think those are always very unfortunate cases, and I think that there has to be a code of conduct, let's say, when designing mobile game features. Well, game features overall. It's not just mobile games that are using gacha mechanics nowadays. And exploiting these types of addictive personality for personal gain is something that no company should do. And thankfully, governments like Belgium are now introducing legislation to stop them from doing so, although unfortunately there are always workarounds. I think that what we should aim when creating this type of gadgets is to make it so that they're actually not offering you a competitive advantage. And So they should just be skins that you can play with, but not something that you need to get into to actually be better at the game. So let's say in April's case, if you are playing with I don't know, your beginner queue. Well, your beginner queue doesn't upgrade, but if you're playing with a queue that you got for free at the time limited event, or with the queue that you got from a gacha, you're not going to be better at the game. It's just a cosmetic, and that's what we usually do in all of the Miniclip games. I think the problem is when we start making it so that a user needs to spend vast amounts of money in gambling mechanics to actually improve at their game. And this is where I think a lot of the complaints that you see being raised towards Diablo Immortal comes from, where you actually cannot reach an adequate power level to consume end-game content if you are not spending. And then I think you probably have seen the news where there are statistics where you need to spend on average $15,000 to get the legendary gem you want in that game. That is, I think, it's a problem, but I think it should become something that is being looked at from a legislation standpoint. I think that the European Union will probably eventually standardize a law against this practice, and then all games will have to adapt to that law. But it's a shame that you see developers basically profiting out of this addictive personality.
Good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one question regarding randomness that you talked about. You
Yes.
talked that players like random, but not true randomness. Can you explain that a little bit further on what not true randomness is?
I actually expected that question, so I have a hidden slide.
Let's go.
Wait. Okay. So what I mean by this is that usually players do not like real randomness, in the sense that you do not usually see people understand what real randomness is like. For instance, there is a famous example that is called the gambler's fallacy, or the Monte Carlo fallacy, and this is because I believe in the 30s in a casino in Monte Carlo, at a, not sure if it was roulette or probably a roulette table, you got the same color 13 times in a row, and it was not something that it was rigged. It's just that it's randomness, and with each spin you had a 50-50 chance of getting that color. So when you look at it individually, that can happen even if the probability is low. And when that happens, players feel like in this case the gacha is rigged, right? If you always have a, I don't know, 0.1% of getting this weapon that you really like in Call of Duty, and you basically never get it, you're actually not going to feel like it's randomness. You're going to go and feel like, oh, I've already spent to acquire 20 of these boxes and I got and didn't get the weapon. Clearly, this is rigged for me not to get the weapon, and it's not real random. So if you introduce PT mechanics, which is basically, it's not a flat 0.1 chance of getting the weapon, it's actually with each use of the gacha, the chance increases. Eventually, the player will get the item that the player wants sooner than if we were using real randomness. And that is why fake randomness, let's say, works better. But a caveat here is that the illusion of randomness should always work in favor of the player. So you should always be increasing probabilities and never decreasing them. And when you do that, the player actually feels like it's random. And if you don't, the player will not feel like it's random. They will feel like it's predetermined. It's interesting, really.
Thank you.
There is a big question on the chat. So, as you said, a large amount of a game's income comes from a small percentage of the players, but those common wisdom is what whales don't want to play at that game. So your monetization should be such that you don't alienate too much from your game's population. At which point do you draw a line of, no, this monetization scheme is too much, and many players will quit, or no, this is not enough to make a product financially viable, aka how to find a sweet spot between pay to win and free to play friendly.
I did not understand the question, sorry.
It's on the chat. I'm sorry.
Is it in Zoom? Or YouTube?
It's in Zoom, it's in Zoom.
Give me a second.
I think if you read the last sentence, it sums it up.
Got it. Yeah. So whales don't want to play that game. Yes. Got it.
It's okay, Pedro.
Yeah, that is definitely true. It's very difficult to balance a free-to-play games economy in the sense that users feel like it's too pay to win and they churn, which is the technical term for stop playing. And you have a lot of examples of that. I think that it helps if you have a large enough player base. Because if you have a large enough player base, even if your game is pay to win, what happens is that the majority of your players will not be spenders, and that is the case of most free-to-play games, right? They're subsidized by a very small subset of the players that are actually spending, so that the game is free for everyone else. And with a large enough DAO, and because usually spenders are a very small subset, players will not be feeling like the game is pay to win, in the sense that for the majority of times, they will be playing against other free-to-play players. Although then obviously, you also need to balance it so that the free-to-play player actually has a chance to win. So in our Miniclip games, for instance, if you spend $30,000 on a gold pool, let's say, and I spend nothing. When I start the game and start playing against you, I have the same chance at winning if I'm as good as you are, because the spending allows me to play at higher tiers, right? So like I said, we have several tables, and each table is more expensive in terms of coins than the previous. But if we're playing in the same table, me spending to access some other table will not give me any advantage whatsoever. I'm just collecting more things. In our case, we when you win a certain match, a certain amount of matches in certain tables, you get a ring, which is basically something that's giving you bragging rights. Or if you win a certain amount in another table without losing another certain amount, you also get a ring. And our spenders are basically people that like to collect. They like to collect cues, they like to collect avatars, they like to collect rings, but they will get no advantage in pure gameplay out of it. If we're talking about the game that actually is offering an advantage, again, like Diablo Immortal, which is always a good example of monetization nowadays, it's way harder to balance, and I think that the team there will probably revert some of their monetization decisions eventually, because so they have a 5 versus 5 PvP mode, and basically a whale there can literally alone defeat the entire opposing team, unless the opposing team also has a very high spend. And when you have that balance there, then I think they are on the edge of making it so that the game is not free to play friendly at all, and people will churn and they will eventually need to revert. And the other relevant thing to mention in regards to this question is that games have life cycles as well, right? They have shelf lives. Even in the era of games that have well, some games have over 20 years now. If you think of RuneScape, for instance, eventually there comes a time where you're not going to be acquiring new users anymore, because for those new users, that's an old game, and you're basically just having your veterans, and you are relying on your veterans. And when that stage of the game comes, then the balance of pay to win versus free to play shifts completely, in the sense that you are not getting enough new daily active users anyway to get your return on investment on making the game free to play friendly. So what you should actually do then is actually start to make the game not necessarily pay to win, but require a lot of spend depth, so that those players that are really hardcore players that stuck with your game, that made an hobby out of it, keep paying so that they access the content. And again, if we're talking about card games, I think, for instance, that that is where Hearthstone is at the moment, right? The company clearly is not being able to attract new players. If you go to Battle.net right now, you actually see that they're offering 80 card packs for users just to start the game, which is clearly a desperate attempt. Because the balance after a while, specifically in games as a service type of games where you need to collect a lot of content, makes it so that if you haven't started the game from the beginning, if you're coming to the game 5 or 10 years later, you need to spend thousands of dollars to catch up, and people won't do that. So that is when you need to double down on pay to win, I guess. I don't know if this answers the question, but basically, to summarize, the balance is really important to specific types of games that do not give you a PvP advantage. When you are giving the PvP advantage to the player, in the early stages of the game, you should be very careful with that balance. And as the game progresses, that balance becomes less and less relevant, because you'll get less and less new players anyway.
Okay, I think there's no more questions, and we're also running out of time. So thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all our questions. Is there an email or a contact that you can leave in case anyone suddenly has any questions about this topic?
Yeah. Yes, I will leave it in the chat. And I also just wanted to share this last slide, which is always, we have career opportunities open at Miniclip right now. You can scan the QR code if you'd like to apply to any of them.
Is there anything data related?
Yes, there is always data related. So it's everything on our website, it's everything on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to join us, we're hiring.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Willson. Thank you for the presentation. It was great.
So guys, this ends our second monthly session of the year, the November monthly session. Thank you all for being here, either on Zoom or on YouTube. And see you again next month. Bye.
Bye.